Hello, welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. We're back, but we're back, well, a little later than we intended to be. So it was a bank holiday on Monday, so there was no live radio show. But there was one big mental health story which really came to the fore on Wednesday morning. It was all about Everton player Aaron Lennon, who was sectioned under the Mental Health Act after an incident over in Manchester on Sunday. It's something we thought would be worth touching on and sort of breaking our Monday embargo on the Wednesday, and we wanted to talk about how athletes, elite athletes, might suffer from mental health outside of the regular issues that normal, everyday Joe people face on a day-to-day basis, and how much of the things that they experience are down to the fact that, well, they're just human beings too. Wanted to get a take on this with a man who's battled his own personal demons when it comes to mental health, Clarke Carlisle, former footballer, former teammate and former chair of the PFA, joining us on Mental Health Monday for this week. Also, a couple of guests who are joining me on Radio City Talks, the panel. Rachel Kearney, who works in training when it comes to mental health, and also Jim Johnson, who's had his own experiences when it comes to mental health and well-being. We'll hear all those conversations, plus we'll also hear from Professor Andy Smith from Edge Hill University. He does lots of research when it comes to elite athletes and their mental well-being as well. So hopefully over the course of this week's show you'll get a sense of maybe some of the issues faced by elite athletes and the fact that mental health, well, let's be honest, it doesn't just affect people from certain backgrounds. It doesn't just affect people from certain age groups. It can affect everybody, rich, poor, or otherwise, successful or not, you name it. Everyone has mental health and everybody can suffer from mental health problems. So here's this week's show. We kick off, in a footballing sense, with former footballer Clarke Carlisle offering his thoughts on Aaron Lennon's situation.
Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.
This is Radio City Talk.
Aaron's situation is it's a terribly sad situation, and one for which I think a lot of football fans might have been surprised that a young athlete who, is successful on the field, has had a good footballing career up to this point so far, has found himself in that situation. You won't be surprised, though, will you? Because of your own experience and the sort of stories that you'll have heard from within the game.
Yes, well, that very sentence that you put together there, mate, is the very reason why people are still surprised. And it's because they believe that to have a mental health illness needs to be justified by circumstance. Mental health issues are illnesses that are as indiscriminate as any other physical illness. It's only due to the intangibility of it that people need feel the need to justify having experienced it. So, in Aaron's case, I'm saddened because he's a former colleague and a friend of mine, but I'm not shocked at all because the statistics in society tell me that he's in the perfect bracket, the prime bracket, to be affected by this, not only by age, but also by social demographic. A young black man in the modern era is also highly susceptible to certain mental health issues. So, yeah, I'm saddened to hear it, but I will say one thing. I know that Everton Football Club are one of the leading clubs when it comes to care and welfare in the community and within their club. So I have no doubts whatsoever that Aaron and his family will get the full support of the football club.
Is that support network there? We've been talking this morning about the PFA. They've got their well-being programme as there, a hotline you can call 24/7, 365 days a year. Is that support there for people like Aaron and professional footballers out there?
Yes, there is support out there. The PFA do what they have. You've outlined their services there. The difficulty with that and with general society is that you can't force someone to engage with services. So if someone doesn't know what's going on or they don't know what services are out there, then there might as well be no services at all. There's a responsibility with the individual to engage with services so that they can then get the necessary help. I'm glad because I know that Aaron is now in the place where he will get the extent of the services that he needs, and encouraged along that path. I have no doubt that he'll be back to full health in no time at all. But this is why the campaigns for awareness and education are so vital. You can't address a problem if you don't know that there's a problem, and you can't address a problem if you don't know where to go for help for that problem, and that's what we need to do.
I was discussing this issue with a professor of sport within one of our local universities who does research into professional athletes within elite sports and their mental health. We were talking about this idea that, when you assess a 17, 18-year-old in a medical situation, you take a look at his knees, you take a look at his cartilage, you take a look at his shins and all sorts. And I was asking the question, is it now the case that clubs should really also be, as part of that medical assessment, take it into mind their mental health and what mental health problems they might face in the future?
100%. You've articulated it perfectly. I've been an advocate of this for the past 4 years now, where I believe that psychometric testing, behavioural type, and a full mental health screening should be done, and it should be introduced from academies. Football clubs now, when they delve into psychology, it's all around optimum performance state. But that doesn't take care of the entire human being. It doesn't cater for the management and maintenance of a healthy mind. That aspect has to be totally separate from the optimum performance psychology. And it's very hard to introduce something so new to, like teaching an old dog new tricks. So it would be something that you can introduce at senior level. But if we made it compulsory at academy and junior level, then the next generation coming through, it won't be anything different or strange to them. It will be part and parcel of their self-awareness and their health process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some clubs are currently engaged in those sorts of activities, but
yes,
that idea about it being a compulsory thing, which works right across the board, I think would really open people's eyes. With your own experiences, Clarke, from your own mental health conditions and your own situation, when you went through your own experiences, did other footballers come to you and say, "Oh, I felt along those lines. I've been in a similar position to you"? I wonder whether or not other teammates of Aaron Lennon, former players, will reach out to him in the coming days and he'll think, I'm not alone in this situation.
I believe so. You can almost guarantee that there will be other people who will come forward and feel like this situation gives them permission to acknowledge what's going on in their own lives. When I did the documentary on suicide back in 2013, I was inundated with responses, from general population, but also from teammates, colleagues, other professional sportsmen in different areas, all of whom, my story resonated with them, and they felt like they now have the permission and the authority to deal with and acknowledge what's going on in their lives. And that's why we need to be open about it. We need to normalise this. The very nature of a lot of mental health conditions are that you become introverted, you isolate yourself, and you believe that no one can help, and no one wants to help. Well, it's the total opposite. It prevents you from engaging in the process that is so necessary for you to come out of the other side.
Clarke Carlisle's with us on Radio City Talk, former footballer, former PFA chair, former teammate of Aaron Lennon. Clarke, we do a feature called Mental Health Monday on the show. We talk about mental health matters week in, week out, and we speak to people all the time who've had situations and similar situations to the one that Aaron Lennon has found himself in. I wonder whether or not sometimes, you've got to bear in mind that the chances are that, if 1 in 4 people are affected by mental health conditions, it'll happen in football as well as it'll happen in offices and schools and, fire stations and wherever right around the country. But I wonder whether or not that almost lets football off the hook a little bit. I wonder whether or not there are specific things about being a footballer or being an elite athlete which we could actually take a look at. The lifestyles that footballers lead in terms of maybe training in the morning, then given lots of spare time, free time on their own in the afternoon, whether or not actually that lifestyle can be changed, and that's that whole life, that holistic look can be taken when it comes to football players.
A holistic approach is exactly what is needed, and it's not so much as letting football off the hook, but it's as far as acknowledging that it doesn't matter what walk of life you're in, there will be specific industry triggers that are relative and relevant only to you and your workforce. So whether that's like my sister, who's a forensic psychiatric nurse, whether it's you're a teacher, whether you're a single parent, there will be certain circumstances and issues that are potential triggers for mental health conditions. And this is why the current NHS system and the current support system it isn't functioning properly, because it has to be industry specific and it has to be person-centred, because one person's coping mechanism will be totally different from the next person's. That takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money. And because of that, I believe that football can be the flag bearers in creating that template of a person-centred, time-specific model that can then be replicated in amongst society. I've been part of a couple of academic research projects that are going on at UCFB and at MNU, and they're looking into these sports and elite athlete-specific triggers, in and around football, in and around the circumstances for elite cricketers and, the time away from home that they spend that will be a specific trigger for them. But in answer to your question, yes, football needs to focus inwards, because the approach for players will be different to the approach that they're endorsing to their fans.
And was football there for you, Clarke? Will Aaron find that the football organisations and the organisations that exist within the game will be able to help him out?
Categorically, yes. The one sad thing about mental health issues is that you can't impose help or recovery upon a person. There has to be a level of engagement from that person. And now that Aaron or anyone in that position steps forward and engages with services, football will be there, because especially the PFA, that they are there to support their players.
Clarke, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate you joining us on Radio City Talk.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
That's former footballer Clarke Carlisle, former PFA chair, former teammate of Aaron Lennon, off the back of the story that Aaron has been detained under the Mental Health Act after an incident in Salford on Sunday. We wish him all the very best, and we thank Clarke for his thoughts as well on that story, and we'll continue to bring you any updates to that story. The PFA website's got quite a lot of information on there, by the way, if you are in professional sport, about some of the signs, symptoms of depression. The PFA.com, and there's a video on there as well which features former PFA chair Clarke Carlisle. There's also a great documentary that he mentioned as well, looking at the issue of suicide. The regular charities that we talk about on the programme as well, also worth checking out if you've been affected by any of the issues that we've touched on. Mind, a very good example of that one. The Calm Zone in particular, Chasing the Stigma, a local organisation set up by Jake Mills as well, and plenty more.
Radio City Talk. Tackling the stigma.
We've got two guests in the studio who are discussing this very issue, actually. Rachel Kearney from Grassroots Consultants and Jim Johnson from Peshkar Productions. Rachel, you've been in and around football clubs that have worked with young people and talked through some of the issues that they're facing. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Everybody's got a responsibility to, when they're involved with young people, to develop a whole human being, But you only need to speak to teachers at the moment to find that even within schools, they're finding that they're teaching to the test. They're becoming exam factories as well. We had a Danish teacher in the studio yesterday saying, well, the whole point of their system is to create individuals and human beings where their well-being, their mental health and well-being is very much at the forefront. But, it's a results business, football, isn't it? Are they good enough on the pitch? Are their knees good enough? Can they kick the ball hard enough? That's generally how we assess people.
I think that the thing, and having worked quite extensively really across lots of different clubs and really, LFE and delivering training with a company called Afterthought. But what we do is they are investing in the young players, because the reality is that only 10% are going to get through, but they are made to think that football is everything to enable them to be one of those 10% that get through. So when they don't, what happens? And it's been massively documented. It's not just about football. It's about any kind of elitist sport and activity, like you say. And obviously there's all the other factors in there. But if we just concentrate just on that kind of elitist, exercise and, sports and all those kind of things, the only way you are going to be in that top 10% is by training your brain and your body to think that you're already there. But the reality is, there may always be somebody who's just that little bit better than you, and you don't get through. So the 90% of those young people that don't get through or don't get on and kept on after apprenticeship is massive. And it's become their own life, and all they get to the age of 19, 20, and that's it. it's done.
I think one of the issues that faces the game is a sort of a collective approach from the PFA, because it appears that a lot of the onus is on the academies to put in, systems in place which support the mental health and the personal development of their charges. But out the other end, both historic and contemporary, you think about Jason McAteer in his book talking about his struggles with with depression, which were essentially, from what I can gather, stemmed from just a sort of a bereavement complex, which is what you do after the game. We think of Kenny Sansom, the former Arsenal captain and England international, who was discovered on a park bench with serious alcoholism issues. But I think, whilst there is an onus on the clubs to develop infrastructure which supports this developing issue, there also needs to be, I think, a collective response from the sector and the playing sector, because there are high wages in at the upper end, and the most successful players tend to gravitate into other careers which are sort of complementary, whether it be in the media or in coaching, so they get a replacement structure. But it's the other ones, lower down. The demands, for instance, lower down. If you're a player at a lower league club, and no less in terms of the commitment level that you get as a Premiership player, and yet the support. It would seem is coming from the PFA.
But we talked there about the situation. Players coming to the fore. Then you've got the players who are going out the other end of their footballing careers, and then you've got the players like Aaron Lennon who are in the game, in the middle of the thing, and they're dealing with their football life on an everyday basis, and it's whether or not they've been prepared to be at that level, or whether or not when they get to that level, that there is ongoing support. Now, Clarke Carlisle in that interview said to me that it was about compulsory mental health and well-being awareness. There's plenty of systems in place. If you want to, you can call this. If you want to, you can go and see somebody. I think he's there talking about flipping that around, where those people go to those players, whether they've asked for their help or not, so that they are aware of the sort of work that goes on and the sort of thing that they can...
Alan Ball used to say, if he had a good game on a Saturday, he was a good player for 3 days. He knew he was a good player for 3 days. Now, if you think about that there's Alan Ball, World Cup winner, played at the top of his game for. He's part of the Holy Trinity, as the Everton fans call him. Ball, Harvey, Kendall, captained Arsenal, and yet there he was, one of the most famous players that this country's ever produced. I'm a good player for 3 days. Now, if you are vulnerable to the impact of mental health conditions like depression, that's an enormous amount of pressure for anybody to put themselves under.
What you're talking about is natural highs and lows. I mean, just that statement is around those natural highs and lows. And if you think about experientially, people who are in those kinds of industries, not just, you're talking people who've, been on the TV, pop stars and bands. It's really, the statistics are really higher because it's a cosseted lifestyle. It's living kind of, you can have anything you want and people are telling you you're wonderful.
Well,
and it's those natural highs and lows that are more symptomatic of bipolar, for example.
And that was one of the things which I wanted to raise with Clarke, and I thought he gave a fair response to it as well when I asked him about the fact that, football is a relatively unique experience. You get rock stars who go on stage in front of 15,000 people and then go back to a hotel room on their own. Footballers go and play in front of 40,000 people and then return home to, maybe their wife, or maybe they live on their own, maybe they return to a hotel room on their own. You have those highs and lows. But equally, and Clarke Carlisle made the point as well, 1 in 4 people are affected by mental health problems. Mm-hmm. So there are unique things about being a footballer, but there's also awareness that as a society, if you are a young man, if you are young and black, as Clarke pointed out, if you're a young man, between the ages of 16 and 30, you're already predisposed to being in this category of people who are more likely to commit suicide, for instance?
I think it's we said off air, but, I'll say it on air, the fact that the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have got behind this whole mental health and Harry talking about when his mum died and how he still thinks about it and still connects to that. And it's just this humanity aspect of mental health. I've worked in mental health for a really long time. I've delivered training. I've worked with young people who are really quite vulnerable for lots and lots of different reasons. I've worked with adults who are incredibly vulnerable as well. And the thing that we need to accept is, as much as you can push your body, and he said it on air before, as much as you can push your body and your body feels the strain, constantly pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling, your mind is exactly the same. And we have to find a way to reconnect the mind-body to understand that the things aren't separate. It's not that you talk about mental health and physical health as separate things. They are your health. It's your health. It's your well-being.
The point Mick was making, and you're absolutely right, Rachel, what you say, is that there are societal conditions which make, and Clarke Carlisle referred to it as well, the societal conditions which make certain key demographics more prone to the impact of mental health issues at certain points in their life. I mean, my understanding of it was that 26... if you were a 26-year-old male, you were that was the optimum age for male suicide, which is, I mean, that's such a frightening statistic that there are all these young men. I mean, my son, for instance, my eldest boy, he went to a funeral of one of his friends, the first one in their cohort. He's 23. Who'd taken his own life. That was last week. I'm not sure that they saw the signs or any of these things. And it's the hidden disease, isn't it?
Well, people who commit suicide, generally, they don't give a warning. The statistics, sorry to interrupt you there, Mick, but the statistics around young men is that they don't tell anybody, and it's a snap decision. That's it, I'm done. Because they haven't felt able to report. Also, statistically, young black men are in the higher category of suicides and mental health issues because of different risk factors within their lives.
I was, just as a human being rather than as a journalist, I was aware, it's why we started doing Mental Health Monday, that there were a number of incidents that were in and around my life and people that I knew, and they were getting closer and closer and closer to home. And it was a friend and a friend, and it was a friend and a friend's brother, or it was a friend and a friend's uncle. Then it was a mate, and then there was an attempted suicide among some. And then suddenly it was within arm's reach, people very, very close to you. And you think, this is everywhere. And football. Footballers they're not exempt from this by any stretch. And there's some people who go, they live this lifestyle, they get everything they want. They've got loads of money. Well, you got loads of money, you got a big house. You live in a big house, possibly on your own.
You can't buy your health. You can't buy your mental health.
And it's that thing, isn't it, where you just think, well, everybody has a risk factor when it comes to that.
Was it not Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics that talked about the Paradise Syndrome? I think because he'd suffered with mental health. I think it was him, and he'd said that because he was a working class boy from a northeast estate, and he became a rock star. And yet, he married the pop star wife, didn't he? And he was married to Siobhan from Bananarama for a while. And yet, in spite of all those factors, he still felt an innate emptiness about his existence. And probably the reality there is, if he'd not been Dave Stewart out of the Eurythmics, he might have ended up being a steel worker or something like that. He would have been still predisposed to those.
But I wonder whether with a professional football, who might have a similar kind of lifestyle. This idea that sometimes footballers lose form, and we don't see him, and we go, oh, he's hopeless, or he was a myth, or he was never going to be the player. He failed to fulfil his potential. Now it might well be that player got to the age of 24, 25, had some sort of mental health crisis. It wasn't known about because we only hear about a handful of these situations. You mentioned Clarke Carlisle talking about it openly, Kenny Sansom. Very few players you actually hear about, but it must be within a squad, at least a couple of them, over the course of a 22-man squad, will be having those sorts of issues. And in many ways, as fans, we almost compound some of those issues. Go, oh, he was never any good, or I told you he'd be a failure, or he's not good enough, or he was never good enough.
The things we say that you shouldn't say to children gets said to people who are in the public domain all the time, and it becomes acceptable. It becomes acceptable for 3 pundits to sit and talk about a footballer losing form without any knowledge of why that's happened. And if we think about that on a mental health issue, everyone, it's that feeling that you've got a shelf life, that you're something and then you're nothing.
I remember.
And it's all of those things that are compounded with it as well.
I remember that very famous Graham Taylor documentary when he was the England manager and he did the fly on the wall thing. And John Barnes used to get a lot of stick from England fans because they always felt that John Barnes couldn't reproduce his Liverpool form for England. And I can remember John Barnes getting some stick in the crowd, and Graham Taylor turned round and he said, "Excuse me, just behave yourself." He goes, "That's another human being." And I always thought, what really came home to me that, and we're all guilty of it.
Jim from Peshkar Productions, we've been talking about it off the back of the interview with Clarke Carlisle and the incident involving Aaron Lennon, where he's been sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So, I mean, we do Mental Health Monday on the show every Monday, Rachel, and it's such a big issue and it covers so many things. Once you sort of open, I don't want to call it a can of worms, but once you open it, you can't put it back in. And I almost think that's a good thing, that once you start talking about mental health, and I feel like we're not that far away from that point, because I hear a lot of people saying all the right things when it comes to mental health, that it'll just go so big that you won't be able to put it back in the box, and people will start talking about the mental health. I've had friends turn to me, I've had family members turn to me, write blog posts and things like that and say, "Oh, this is how I feel. Does anyone else feel like this?" And they're always shocked at the reaction that they get. And it's almost like, people are talking about mental health, and they're talking about it a little bit more. But unfortunately, we find ourselves that we have these sort of trigger moments, don't we? And Aaron Lennon is very much at the forefront of that. Trigger moments. There's a reason to talk about mental health. There shouldn't need to be a reason to talk about it.
I think it's an incredible investment that you have Mental Health Mondays on Radio City Talk. I think, personally, the more people and the more often you talk about it, the more awareness is out there of the services that are available for people. And do you know what? Mental health isn't something that happens to other people. You can wake up one morning and you can have a mental health issue, and it can be fluctuating, and it can be there because of something that's just reared its head, or it can be an ongoing struggle. And just because you've got a mental health issue, I don't think it's portrayed positively in the media. I don't think, you have storylines. I'm not big on soaps at all, but I just really remember when I was delivering mental health training, the whole issue around Stacey on EastEnders and being bipolar. And then right at the end, she was the one who murdered somebody. And I'm like, you just had such a golden opportunity to talk about mental health in a positive way. People with mental health ongoing issues aren't scary. Not everybody is a mad axe murderer, and it's that term, isn't it? Mad axe murderer. People are afraid to talk about mental health because they think that it will put them in a bad light. People don't want to raise things like being off with stress on application forms because it makes them look weak and not able to cope, and it's not the truth. I'm working with a lot of young people at the moment who, for one reason or another, are struggling, and everything I do is about encouraging them to talk about it. It's not that a lot of people, when they talk about it, want an answer from you. They actually just want to talk about it and answer it themselves.
It's also an extremely broad church, mental health, in terms of like what the conditions are, what the symptoms are, what the cures are, and one of the problems that
what the reasons are as well.
One of the reasons are, yeah, absolutely, and one of the problems that society needs to come to grips with. And I think we talked about it when you launched mental health, your City Talks mental health campaign. Myself and Rachel happened to be your panellists that day, and we were talking about it in the context of Theresa May's launch of a strategy around more money into mental health research and what have you. But of course, we talk. You talked about cuts to cams and things like that.
Spin. I mean, it was absolute. That was an absolute spin because they're not actually taking the money. They're not giving extra money. They're asking that the CCGs take money from another service that is probably
they borrowed
overstretched.
from Peter to pay for all, essentially,
and put it into mental health to buy into this.
And actually, just from a party political point of view, people will have their own sort of priorities when it comes to mental health.
Course.
But across any board, if you can almost say, great, more money for mental health, but sometimes that might be at the cost of, cancer treatment, so it might be the cost. And any political party will have to make those decisions because there's finite amount of cash available to it. But it's about it being a priority. But it doesn't mean that somebody with a mental health condition is more of a priority than somebody who's got a broken arm. There's
but we've all got
parity
mental
of
health.
esteem.
It should be part of the NHS anyway. This separation of mental and physical health is the disconnect that really, when people are talking about things like mindfulness, all mindfulness is, without being airy-fairy and drawing lovely, colourful, butterflies. There's nothing wrong with all of that, but I'm passionate about getting away from this airy-fairy, it's something that hippies do, or I haven't got time for it. All mindfulness is giving yourself a moment to breathe and to reconnect with what is going on with you internally.
How do you make that the most prominent thing, though, that people think about when they talk about mental health? Because, Jim, growing up, when if you're talking about somebody who's got a mental illness, you think of the mental asylum, you think of men in white coats,
schizophrenia and those kind of things,
straight jackets,
voices in your head,
rooms, and all that kind of stuff as well. That's almost the pre-programmed society thing that we have when it comes to mental health. How do you make that shift to it being, it's not about that, it's about mental well-being, it's about feeling happy? Because it's less of an easy image to portray, although a smiling face, is a smiling face by any books. But we have these ingrained stigmas that we associate with mental health.
Where do they come from?
So if it's society's,
where do they come from?
So if it's society's problem, one of the things that society needs to do is it needs to find out ways that people within society can get more validation for who they are as people, just out of their existence, rather than the sort of job they have or the car that they drive or those kind of things. Because one of the problems is the pressure that people are put under in modern Western societies, that they only it's almost like the onset of the Big Brother contestant or the minor celebrity or the Towie generation, that essentially you've got to have had your 15 minutes of fame in order to justify your existence. Yeah. But let's not forget that Winston Churchill suffered with depression. He called it the black dog. And he is widely considered to be one of the greatest living British people. Stephen Fry is another one. Extremely popular on Twitter, extremely beloved. They call him a national treasure, and he is somebody that has had serious issues with mental health.
We need to break down the barriers. We need to stop thinking that actually it's about somebody else and not us. And you raised the question then, Mick. It's this stigma, it's this societal, but we need to change that. We need to change it. It's not something that somebody else can change by putting a new Act of Parliament through. We need to change it, and we need to start talking bit by bit, more and more, with our young people, with adults, with everybody, that, how are you? And we all get used to saying, I'm okay or I'm fine.
Be happy.
It's actually okay to be not okay. It's okay to talk about that as well, if you feel ready and if you feel able. But it is about offering people choices about where they go and who they speak to. And sometimes it can be a random person at a till. People strike up conversations with me all the time. I must be one of them people who just go, and they just want to talk. And that's that is breaking down those barriers. We can do that.
It's we can do it. Society can do it. If your child was sent some homework and it says draw a picture of how you want to be in the future, and they just drew a big smiling face, what would the teacher say?
Well,
would the teacher say you've not fulfilled the task correctly?
No, I disagree. I actually think that it's certainly, from my own experience, growing up with losing my father at an early age, and then losing my best friend, and my grandmother, all in the space of sort of the age of 7 to 16. Actually, personal happiness was the only thing I wanted. I remember when my best friend died. He died, and I was in my first band. Rock and roll, being in a band's been a big part of my life. My brother turned to me and he says, "Well, you best make it now." Right. Now, as a 16-year-old, I thought, well, surely that means, this is back in 1987, well, that means to be rich and famous. Now, as I sit here now, still in a band, I realise that actually being in a band not only was therapy for me, but it was its own reward. And actually, that's been, having that as a thing in my life, as a big part of my life, is a really, really positive thing in my life. But my mum, who experienced it at the sharp end, because of course she not only, I lost my father, but she lost her partner, and she was widowed at 42. She said to me in the intervening years, she's always said, she goes, if you can reconcile yourself to the fact that marriage is boring and life is hard, you'll spend every day of your life being pleasantly surprised.
I like that. Just on that quote, John Lennon, just on what you were saying, John Lennon was quoted as a teacher asking him the same question, what do you want to be when you're older? And he said, happy. Mm-hmm. And the teacher said, no, you've misunderstood the question. And he said, no, you've misunderstood the answer. Mm. And I think there's something quite profound in that.
Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk. Tackling the stigma.
Let's speak to somebody who really knows their stuff when it comes to things like this. Professor Andy Smith is the Professor of Sport and Physical Activity from Edge Hill University, and he looks at the mental well-being of elite athletes. Very pleased to say Andy joins us on the programme now. Andy, thank you for your time. Really appreciate you coming on.
No problem.
This is a story which I think has surprised a few people, because those who aren't really in the know when it comes to mental health being will think, young, rich guy, professional footballer, what sort of problems could he be facing? Well, it just goes to show, doesn't it, that your mental health, well, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what you do, how much money you've got. It can be a problem for many different people.
It is, and you're absolutely right, Mick. I think the key point about this and lots of other cases is that elite athletes are not immune to mental illness, just like anybody in society isn't immune. And despite the perception, and it is a perception, that a celebrity lifestyle or money that you and I might not earn in a year is earned weekly by lots of sports stars, is not something which can be used to offset any of the threats to positive mental health. And in some cases, including a lot of the athletes who we've spoken to in our research, it actually makes them even more predisposed to the development of some mental illnesses, rather than protecting them as is commonly thought or perceived by people in the public.
Yeah, is there anything about the sort of the nature of being a football player or a professional athlete that sort of lends itself to having potential side effects from a mental health point of view?
Yeah, particularly at the highest levels of sports, including professional sport, a lot of these athletes live most of their time in the public eye, and they work in the public eye, and they're frequently exposed to a whole variety of criticism, scrutiny and comments, whether it's through mainstream press, through the media, through match day crowds and so on. And that often discourages a lot of them from speaking publicly about many of the challenges and threats to their mental health that affect everybody, whether they're relationship problems, money problems, concerns about work or family. And that is really a key concern for a lot of people who work in professional sport.
And I wonder whether or not, everyone has highs and lows in their lives. I wonder whether or not, and you sometimes hear about musicians talking about this and stand-up comedians, the sort of the thrill of a period on stage and then going backstage or returning to your hotel room and being on your own or, without that sort of crowd support. I wonder whether or not that is something which echoes with professional footballers, that the highs are so very, very high, but then you do get a lot of downtime as well. You get a lot of time when you're not with that group of friends. You get a lot of time where you might be on your own. It's not like being in an office 9 to 5, is it?
No, and even though that a lot of people will compete in team situations, actually they can be very lonely situations for a lot of athletes, and certainly those that we've spoken to recall much more prominently the times where they spent spend time away from family, friends, whether they're in hotel rooms, whether it's travelling, or whether it's just an inability to speak to people, whether they're teammates or people within the sporting arena. That can be really very stressful for athletes, and that loneliness and isolation is, of course, one of the big triggers for the development of some mental illnesses.
And in terms of the research on this one, is it something which is widely researched? It's something that you've been working on. What sort of aspects of it require further looking at, if you like?
The mental illness in athletes has been researched a lot of the time through psychological research and through kind of performance, about how we can enhance performance. Much less research is being conducted on how athletes actually manage the pressures on them from elite sports settings, and particularly how the blurring of their private and personal lives with their working lives really comes to impact negatively on their mental health. And that's really the reason why certainly the work that we've been doing at Edgehill University has really tried to understand what it feels and means to elite athletes to experience mental illness, whether they're in the public limelight, or more usually when they're at home, or whether they're off screen and away from the public attention. That's really where a lot of the research needs to be investigated, how athletes manage this, particularly backstage, if you like, when they're not in the public eye.
We've got Professor Andy Smith with us on Radio City Talk. He's also been a contributor to Mental Health Monday. He's a trustee of Jake Mills charity as well, Chasing the Stigma, and he worked at Edgehill University through their Faculty of Arts and Sciences and the Department of Sport and Physical Activity. He's done research into the situation we're talking about today, the mental health of elite athletes. When athletes get to the age of sort of 16, 17, where they make a decision to turn professional, or that decision is made kind of on their behalf based on their own abilities, is that maybe a point where their mental health needs to be taken into account, that before they get into the highs and the lows, before the huge benefits and all the huge negatives of being a high-profile athletes really kick in? That's a point at which you could maybe have assessments of mental health and judge whether or not somebody might need to have, special management throughout their career.
There is a very clear argument that we should take mental health seriously, regardless of the age of athletes or performers, not just at 16, 17. We know from the research generally that 50% of all mental illnesses that are experienced during adulthood, i.e. over the age of 18, are first present by 14, and 3/4 of all mental illness which is experienced by adults are first experienced by 18. So the age group that you're referring to, and it's typically the time period where, in football at least, many young athletes are in academies, is really a very important time, not just to address the potential consequences of mental illness, but to develop positive strategies for the promotion of positive mental health. And certainly the young footballers that we've spoken to several hundred throughout the Premier League through to League Two, in the case of football, routinely recall that being a very difficult period where they don't feel able to discuss their mental health and well-being, or any other kind of concerns which they might have with people in the professional sports setting. So it really is a good opportunity for us to support young people who are working in quite abnormal environments, quite adult-oriented environments, to develop strategies that promote their mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I wonder whether or not there's just an expectation that if you are capable from a sporting point of view, you're also capable of dealing with all the other aspects which come with being an elite athlete. And that's obviously not the case, because everybody's an individual.
Yeah, and a lot of the emphasis, of course, is based on the physical abilities of athletes. And usually when, depending on the sport, but most usually in cases like football, players are often picked on the basis of their physical ability and capability, and rather less consideration is given to their mental well-being, and that not just for performance, but in terms of their own personal lives and lives away from the pitch. And that is really one core area where a lot of work needs to be done, because usually when athletes do drop out of professional sports environments, it's not just because they're not able physically to cope with the demands, but also to do with the psychological and mental pressures that are put on them by themselves and other people, but also the pressure of living their kind of youth, if you like, in rather adult environments.
In terms of the physical side of things, you get players taking medicals, don't you? And clubs assess players from a medical point of view. Are their knees up to it? Are their hips up to it? Is that something which we might see in the future, that you essentially include a mental health assessment into your medical setup within a football club?
Certainly among those clubs who are very committed to the holistic health and well-being, the all-round health and well-being of players would do that. And there's a very clear case, not just for doing that in medicals, but actually for doing that routinely. In other words, just like the growth of kind of sports science, where we measure people's heart rate and how hard or they might be working weekly or daily in training, we should also be tracking routinely the mental health and well-being of athletes, because that can fluctuate just like our heart rate or weight or ability to run quicker or slower can. So I think part of that development and support for elite athletes in the future, if it's to be ethically appropriate for athletes, but also to have performance benefits, which should focus on mental fitness, not just, as is commonly the case, physical fitness.
And what percentage of football clubs do you think would take that into account when signing a player or signing up a player onto their books at a young age?
It's very difficult to say, partly because there's very little evidence that is available for us to judge that. Certainly in our own experience, the vast majority of players and clubs that we've ever spoken to have almost always commented on their concerns about their physical abilities. Very few clubs have ever spoken, at least in the initial early selection stages, about the mental health and well-being of players. So it would be difficult to put an estimate on it, but I would be surprised if there are lots of clubs adopting this as common practice at the moment.
Thank you for your time today, and it's a really sad story, isn't it? And sometimes you feel like should we be discussing the Aaron Lennon situation? We're doing our best to use it as a way of talking about mental health. It always comes back to that thing, doesn't it? That people go, well, if we felt like we could talk about it more, we would talk about it more. You're talking to professional athletes about it. Are they open to it? Are they glad of an opportunity to speak to you or one of your researchers when they get a chance to talk about their mental health?
The one thing that struck us and struck me in particular when speaking to players or athletes, and not just footballers, is that it represents, sometimes for the very first time, their ability to speak to somebody who's outside of their working world, if you like, about the fairly regular and routine pressures that we all face in daily life. And certainly when we speak to younger athletes in particular, it's an opportunity for them to discuss their concerns and anxieties, not just about performance, but about things like family, relationships and money. And I think that there's clearly a long way to go, even in the very highest levels of professional sport, where conversations that we would have around mental health become as routine, common, and part of the run-of-the-mill, just like regular sports performance or sports sciences.
Andy, thank you for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show today.
That's great. Thanks, Mick.
So that wraps up this week's Mental Health Monday. Our thanks to Andy Smith from Edge Hill University. Before that, Rachel Kearney and Jim Johnson. And at the top of the programme this week, former footballer Clarke Carlisle. We wish the very best to Aaron Lennon and his family as he goes through a tough time at the moment, and various people can have their say and have been having their say through social media on that one at Radio City Talk. ThePFA.com has got a good list as well of signs, symptoms and things to look out for when it comes to matters like stress and depression in their well-being section. That's ThePFA.com if you are involved in professional sport. If you've got a story you want to tell on the programme, you can drop me an email, mick@radiocity.co.uk. That's mick@radiocity.co.uk. And we could be telling a story like yours, similar to yours, or indeed your story next week on Radio City Talks Mental Health Monday.
Radio City Talks Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.